Marcus slid the ring off Diane's finger while she slept. Pocketed it. He laughed. She won't need it. I sat 3 feet away, holding her other hand. Said nothing. My grip tightened on her frail fingers. He didn't notice. He never noticed anything that mattered. He didn't know about the claws. If this story hooks you, hit subscribe and tell me your country in the comments. It means the world to me. My name is Glenn Mercer. I'm 62 years old, and I spent 26 years catching liars for a living. Southwestern Life Insurance hired me straight out of community college in 1995. I started in claims processing, shuffling paper, and learning how ordinary people described their losses. Within 2 years, I noticed details the senior investigators missed. A signature that trembled on the second page, but not the first. A receipt dated 3 days before a policy was purchased. Stories that changed by 1 word between the first statement and the third. My supervisor called it the Mercer Eye. The name stuck. By 2002, I was running complex fraud investigations across 4 states. By 2010, I'd recovered over $40 million in fraudulent claims and testified in more than 200 cases. Insurance companies from Texas to California flew me in to consult on cases their own people couldn't crack. I built procedures, trained investigators, and wrote the clauses that became industry standard for detecting theft from estates. The criminals always thought they were clever. They planned their schemes for months, sometimes years. They forged signatures and staged accidents and recruited accomplices. And every single time, they left a trail. A date that didn't match. A photograph taken at the wrong angle. A story that made sense until you checked the weather report for that day. 26 years of catching people who believed they were smarter than the system. 26 years of reading faces, checking timestamps, following money. The work-shaped habits that spilled into everything else. I photographed every major purchase. I kept receipts organized by month. I backed up documents to 3 separate locations because I'd seen too many people lose everything when a single hard drive failed. Some people called it paranoid. I called it professional habit. I retired in October 2020, 6 months after I married Diane. We met at a grief counseling group in Phoenix, both widowed, both exhausted from the specific loneliness that comes from losing a spouse after decades of marriage. My first wife, Carol, had passed 18 months earlier. Diane's husband, Richard, had been gone almost 2 years. We sat in folding chairs in a church basement, strangers united by absence. She passed me the tissue box without being asked. That small gesture said everything. Diane was 60 when we married. Soft gray curls, kind eyes that crinkled when she laughed, hands that still remembered 30 years of shelving library books at the elementary school where she'd worked. She moved into my house in North Phoenix, bringing her collection of paperbacks and her jewelry box and her habit of reading aloud in the evenings while I checked weather data on my monitoring stations. She thought the weather stations were charming. 3 of them positioned around the property, feeding data to my computer for tracking atmospheric pressure and humidity levels. I'd picked up amateur meteorology in my 50s as a way to decompress from fraud cases. Systems that followed rules. Behaviors you could predict if you watched long enough. Unlike people. Our marriage was built on small things. Coffee together every morning at 6, before the Phoenix heat turned brutal. Evening walks through the neighborhood when the temperature dropped. Her voice reading to me from whatever novel had caught her attention that week, while I watched barometric pressure drop ahead of a storm. For 3 years, we had something I'd stopped believing was possible. Companionship without complications. Comfort without demands. 2 people who'd survived loss and found reasons to keep going. Then the diagnosis came. Pancreatic cancer, stage 3. The oncologist delivered the news in his office on a Tuesday afternoon in April 2023. Diane sat beside me, her hand gripping mine hard enough to hurt. The doctor's words washed over us in clinical waves. Aggressive. Limited treatment options. Median survival measured in months, not years. I watched Diane's face as she absorbed it. The flicker of fear, then acceptance, then something like resolve. She'd been a librarian for 30 years. She knew how stories ended. Some just ended sooner than others. We drove home in silence. I made dinner. She didn't eat. We sat on the back patio, watching the sun set over the desert, and she said, "I don't want to spend whatever time I have left in hospitals." So we made a plan, the best hospice team I could find. The master bedroom converted into a comfortable space with a hospital bed facing the window, the Superstition Mountains visible on clear days, the hum of medical equipment, antiseptic mixed with her lavender lotion. I would be her primary caregiver. The professionals would handle what I couldn't. For 18 months, that's what we did. I learned to adjust morphine drips and change bedding without disturbing her. I sat with her for hours when she was too tired to talk, holding her hand while she slept. I read to her when her eyes couldn't focus on the pages anymore. And I watched her son circle like a vulture. Marcus Webb was 34 when I married his mother, now 37. Already a grown man with a wife named Tanya, a 7-year-old daughter named Kaylee, and a trail of financial wreckage that started in his early 20s and never stopped. I tried to build a relationship. I attended Kaylee's birthday parties and school plays. I offered business advice when Marcus complained about his day trading losses. I stayed silent when he made comments about my retirement hobbies or questioned whether Diane should be making major decisions without consulting her real family. Marcus viewed me as an interloper. The man who'd stolen his mother's attention when he needed it, who'd moved into her life when her money should have been flowing toward him. He never said it directly. He didn't have to. I read people for 26 years. I knew what resentment looked like under a thin smile. After the cancer diagnosis, the relationship shifted. Marcus started visiting more often, always with Tanya, always during the narrow window when the hospice nurse was on break. He'd sit with Diane for 10 or 15 minutes, talking loudly about investments and opportunities and plans that never materialized. Then he'd wander the house while Tanya photographed things. The first time I noticed items missing from the jewelry box, I told myself I was imagining it. I opened the velvet case and saw the empty impression where her mother's gold bracelet had been. A dust-free outline showing recent removal. The second time, I checked my monthly photographs. The bracelet. Gone. Worth $3,200, according to the insurance appraisal I'd completed 3 years earlier. I didn't confront Marcus. I didn't tell Diane. Instead, I did what 26 years of fraud investigation had trained me to do. I documented everything. Monthly photographs became weekly photographs. I installed 3 hidden cameras in the house, one built into a clock radio, one in a smoke detector housing, one behind a picture frame. The cameras uploaded footage to a secure cloud server with military-grade encryption, with backup copies saved to USB drives stored in my office safe and a bank deposit box. I pulled Marcus's financial records. Not difficult, if you know where to look and have contacts who owe you favors from decades of collaboration. 2 mortgages on the Scottsdale house. Maxed credit cards totaling $62,000. Home equity line drawn to its limit. Personal loans from Tanya's parents that had destroyed that relationship. And the brokerage statements. Red ink. Margin calls. A man drowning in numbers. Over 5 years of day trading, Marcus had lost more than $200,000. Money that belonged to Tanya's family, to their retirement accounts, to their daughter's future. He'd bought high, panic sold low, and doubled down on losses in desperate attempts to recover. 2 margin calls in the past year had nearly bankrupted him. He wasn't stealing from greed. He was stealing from panic. That made him more dangerous. I kept my leather notebook updated with every observation. Dates, times, visitors, any changes I noticed in the house. The same careful handwriting I'd used for 26 years of fraud reports. The same attention to detail that had caught criminals who thought their schemes were perfect. In my career, I'd learned one thing above all else. People who steal from family always think they're the clever one. They believe love blinds their victims. They count on grief and confusion and the reluctance to suspect someone close. They never expect the old man in the corner to be watching. They never imagine he's documented their every move. 3 years before the diagnosis, when Diane and I were planning our life together, I designed her estate insurance policy myself. A comprehensive plan covering her jewelry collection, valued at $340,000, with itemized photographs, appraisals, and provenance documentation for every significant piece. I included Clause 6 CIII on page 16, a suspicious activity provision I'd written variations of for dozens of clients over the years. When insured items appear at pawn shops, estate sales, or auction houses within 2 years of the policyholder's death, automatic investigation is triggered. The insurance company's fraud team receives notification. An inquiry begins. Diane read the policy and smiled. She called me paranoid. I told her what I'd told every client who questioned my precautions. Hope for the best. Insure for the worst. She laughed and signed the papers, and I filed them in 3 separate locations. The clause sat dormant for 3 years. A trap hidden in legal language, waiting. Marcus never read the policy. He never read anything that didn't promise quick returns or easy money. He saw his mother's jewelry collection as his inheritance, money that would flow to him eventually, money he could access early if he was careful enough. He wasn't careful. He was desperate. The day Diane received her diagnosis, I sat beside her in that sterile office and held her hand while the oncologist explained what was coming. Afterward, we drove home and sat together, processing what we'd heard. Marcus arrived 2 hours later. He walked into the house without knocking, found us in the living room, and sat down across from his mother with an expression I recognized from 1,000 fraud interviews. Concern layered over something colder. His first words weren't about treatment options, or pain management, or how he could help. His first question wasn't about his mother at all. Have you updated your estate plans, Mom? Just want to make sure everything's in order. Diane didn't notice the calculation behind the concern. She was too tired, too scared, too overwhelmed by what the doctor had told her. She squeezed my hand and told Marcus that Glenn had handled all the paperwork. Marcus looked at me then, quick and measuring. The look of a man recalculating his approach. I looked back with the same mild expression I'd worn in 1,000 interviews with suspects who thought they were smarter than me. Pleasant, patient, giving nothing away. He didn't know I'd already started watching. He didn't know about the cameras, or the photographs, or the notebook in my office safe. He didn't know about Clause 6 CII, or my contacts at Southwestern Life, or the forensic accountant who still owed me a favor from the Hendricks case in 2010. He saw an old man with weather stations and retirement hobbies. A mild obstacle between him and his mother's jewelry collection. That night, after Marcus left, I sat in my office surrounded by filing cabinets and monitors and the tools of a lifetime spent catching liars. I updated my documentation. I verified that all backup systems were functioning. I checked the clause one more time, confirming every provision was in place. I hoped I would never need any of it. I hoped Marcus would surprise me, would be a good son when his mother needed him most. I hoped the desperation I'd seen in his financial records wouldn't override whatever love he felt for the woman who'd raised him. I hoped for the best. But I'd insured for the worst. 26 years of reading people taught me that hope is not a strategy. You prepare for what's coming. You document everything. You wait. And when the time comes, You're ready. Everything that followed started with that diagnosis. With Marcus's question about the will. With my decision to watch and document and wait. The foundation was laid. 26 years of expertise. A dying wife. A desperate stepson. And an insurance clause on page 16, waiting to be triggered. The first theft happened 3 weeks after Diane entered full hospice care. I sat in my office that afternoon, checking barometric pressure readings on my Davis Vantage Pro 2. A low-pressure system was pushing in from the coast, promising rain by Thursday. Weather, I understood. Family, I was still learning. Marcus's silver BMW pulled into the driveway at 2:47 p.m. I noted the time in my leather notebook. Tanya climbed out of the passenger side, smoothing her highlighted hair, checking her reflection in the window. Marcus followed, adjusting his polo shirt over gym-sculpted arms that looked like they cost $300 a month in membership fees. I watched them approach the door. Watched Marcus fumble with his phone, checking something on the screen. Watched Tanya's eyes sweep across the front of the house, with the appraising gaze of a realtor calculating square footage. They didn't knock. Marcus had a key. Maria Santos, the day-shift hospice nurse who'd been with us since October, had left 15 minutes earlier for her afternoon break. She always took 45 minutes, always walked to the coffee shop 2 blocks over. Marcus knew her schedule. He'd asked about it during his second visit, casual and concerned. Just want to make sure Mom has someone with her when we can't be here. I'd noted that conversation in my book, page 12, October 3rd. Through the monitor, I watched them enter the hospice room. Marcus bent to kiss his mother's forehead. Diane stirred but didn't wake. The morphine kept her comfortable, kept her drifting in a gray place between sleep and something deeper. Marcus pulled a chair close to the bed and sat down. He took out his phone again. Started talking without looking at her. I couldn't hear the words through the camera, but I'd heard variations of this speech before. Investments. Opportunities. The market's about to turn around. His mouth moved with that particular urgency of someone selling something they don't quite believe in themselves. Tanya didn't sit. She stood in the doorway for a moment, watching Marcus perform, then drifted out of frame. I switched cameras. The hallway feed showed her walking toward the living room. Slow steps. Her hand trailed along the wall, touching the frames of photographs we'd hung there. Our wedding day. Kaylee's birthday parties. Diane at the library, where she'd worked for 30 years. Tanya stopped at the china cabinet. Opened the glass door. Her phone came out. She photographed the contents. Crystal wine glasses. A porcelain tea set that had belonged to Diane's grandmother. Silver candlesticks from our first anniversary. She moved through the house like this for 36 minutes. Opening drawers, photographing contents, checking labels on the bottoms of vases, running her fingers along the spines of books on the shelves, pausing when she found a first edition. I documented every room she entered, every cabinet she opened, every photograph she took. On the bedroom monitor, Marcus checked his watch, glanced toward the door. He'd been sitting with his mother for 11 minutes. He stood up, patted Diane's hand once, said something I couldn't hear. Then he walked out of frame, and I heard his footsteps in the hallway, heading toward the bathroom. The bathroom was next to our bedroom, the bedroom where I kept the jewelry box on Diane's dresser. I switched cameras again. The picture frame in our bedroom contained a wireless lens. I'd installed it the week after Marcus's first visit, when the way Tanya had looked at Diane's engagement ring made my fraud instincts fire. The feed showed Marcus entering the room. He didn't look around, didn't hesitate. He walked straight to the dresser, lifted the lid of the jewelry box, and began sorting through its contents. He sorted through the contents in 8 seconds flat. I'd timed it. He knew what he was looking for. I watched him select a gold bracelet from the second compartment. A hinged bangle with a safety chain, given to Diane by her mother Eleanor on her wedding day to Richard. He held it up to the light, turned it over, checked the clasp. Then he slipped it into his pocket. The whole thing took less than 40 seconds. He closed the jewelry box, adjusted the lid so it sat exactly as before, walked out of the room. I noted the time, 3:28 p.m. 41 minutes later, Marcus and Tanya left. They said goodbye to Diane, who woke briefly, confused, reaching for her son's hand. Marcus held it for a moment, kissed her forehead again, told her to rest. I walked them to the door, shook Marcus's hand. "Thanks for coming." Marcus nodded, his expression arranged into something like concern. "How's she really doing, Glenn?" "Day by day." "You sure you can handle this?" Tanya asked. Her voice had that particular tone of condescension dressed up as care. "It's a lot for someone your age." "I'm managing." Marcus clapped my shoulder. "We'll be back soon. Let us know if you need anything." I watched them drive away. Then I went to check the jewelry box. The bracelet was gone. A dust-free outline in the velvet showed where it had rested for 8 years. I photographed the empty space, checked my insurance database. Eleanor's hinged bangle, 18-karat gold with safety chain. Appraised value, $3,200. I opened my notebook and began writing. Date, time, item, value. Duration of visit. Observations. This was the beginning. The pattern emerged over the following weeks. Same as a low-pressure system. You see it forming on the charts before it hits. Marcus and Tanya visited twice weekly, Tuesdays and Fridays. Always between 2003 and 4 p.m. Always during Maria's break. Always together. Each visit followed the same structure. Marcus would sit with Diane, talking about investments, opportunities, plans that existed only in his imagination. 10 minutes. Sometimes 15 if Diane was awake enough to respond. Then he'd find an excuse to leave the room. Bathroom, phone call, just going to check something. Meanwhile, Tanya worked through the house, opening drawers, photographing valuables, cataloging everything with the precision of an estate assessor. I documented everything. October 8th, pearl earrings, drop style, $1,800 value. Tanya photographed the contents of the hall closet. Marcus questioned whether I'd remembered to pay the property taxes. October 11th, diamond tennis bracelet, $4,200 value. Tanya opened the filing cabinet in my office while I was helping Diane drink water. Marcus suggested I might want to consider moving to a smaller place after everything settled. October 15th, emerald pendant, $2,800 value. Tanya measured the dining room with her phone's app. Marcus asked if I'd thought about long-term care options. For yourself, Glenn. Mom would want you taken care of. The jewelry box grew emptier. My notebook grew thicker. I started tracking the verbal campaigns alongside the thefts. The gaslighting attempts, the competency questions, the careful construction of a narrative in which I was failing. "You sure you remember that right, Glenn?" Marcus asked one afternoon. "You've been under a lot of stress lately." I've been explaining that Diane preferred her morphine adjusted at specific times. I knew her schedule. I've been managing it for 6 months. "Maybe we should talk to the doctor," Marcus continued. "Make sure you're not overextending yourself." "I'm fine." Tanya appeared in the doorway. "Have you considered hiring professional caregivers? This is really a lot for someone to handle alone, especially at your age. The hospice team is excellent." "I meant for you," Tanya said. "Someone to help around the house. Make sure things don't slip through the cracks." I let my shoulders drop slightly, rubbed my eyes, nodded slowly. "Maybe you're right. I'll think about it." They exchanged a glance. The kind of look people share when a plan is working. I noted the conversation in my book. November 2nd. Competency questioning, third instance this month. The strategy was transparent to anyone who'd spent 26 years catching fraudsters. They were building a case, establishing a pattern of documented concern about my mental state, setting the groundwork for something more aggressive down the line. A conservatorship, perhaps. Taking control of Diane's affairs, accelerating whatever inheritance they believed they were owed. I played my role. I shuffled a little more when they visited, asked them to repeat themselves occasionally, let my eyes go unfocused when Marcus talked about the market. The confused old man, overwhelmed by grief, struggling to cope. It was the easiest performance of my career. People believe what they want to believe, and Marcus wanted to believe I was falling apart. On November 14th, I knew the pearls were gone before I opened the jewelry box. I knew from the weight of it when I lifted the lid. The compartment that held Eleanor's Mikimoto necklace was empty. A double strand of AAI grade-cultured pearls with rose overtones, 45 pieces per strand, graduated from 6 to 9 millimeters. Diane's mother had bought them in 1962, the year Diane was born. They'd been worn at Eleanor's funeral, at Diane's first wedding, at our wedding. The insurance file listed them at $45,000. Separately insured. Full provenance documentation going back 60 years. But the number didn't capture what they meant. Diane had held them against Kaylee's neck last Christmas. Someday, she'd said, for your wedding day. Now, the velvet impression, where they'd rested for decades, held nothing but dust. I photographed the empty compartment, logged the theft in my notebook, checked my insurance database for the appraisal, the provenance, the photographs I'd taken 6 weeks ago showing the pearls exactly where they should be. Then, I walked to the hospice room and sat beside Diane. She was sleeping. The morphine kept her comfortable these days, kept her drifting in a place where pain couldn't reach. Her breathing was shallow but steady. Her hand, when I took it, felt light as paper. Warm but fragile, like holding something that might crumble. I sat with her for an hour, watching the Arizona sunset paint the Superstition Mountains in shades of gold and rose, listening to the hum of medical equipment, the tick of the clock on the wall, thinking about what her son was doing while she died. I couldn't tell her. Couldn't burden her final months with the knowledge that Marcus was picking through her belongings like a scavenger at a carcass. She'd spent 40 years loving him. She didn't deserve to spend her last weeks knowing he'd never loved her back. So I held her hand and said nothing. That night, after the evening nurse left and the house fell quiet, I sat in my office and reviewed what I knew about Marcus's financial situation. The debt structure was worse than I'd initially calculated. Forensic work had given me a clearer picture. First mortgage, $340,000. Second mortgage, tacked on 2 years later, $125,000. The man was drowning in numbers. Home equity line of credit, drawn to its $78,000 limit. Credit cards across 4 institutions, totaling $62,000. Personal loans from Tanya's parents, another $45,000 that had ended those relationships permanently. Monthly obligations exceeded income by $4,200. The stolen jewelry barely made a dent. The brokerage statements told their own story. 5 years of day trading. Buy high, panic, sell low, double down on losses. The same pattern, repeated dozens of times. 2 margin calls in the past 18 months, each one narrowly avoided through desperate scrambling. Total losses, $247,000. Marcus wasn't stealing from greed. He was stealing from panic. From the desperation of a man watching his failures compound faster than he could cover them. From the terror of someone who'd built his entire identity on success and was watching it collapse. Desperate people don't calculate consequences. That made him dangerous. I pulled up the insurance database and ran a query on recent pawnshop transactions in the Phoenix metropolitan area. The system flagged 7 hits on items matching descriptions in Diane's policy. Gold bracelet, hinged with safety chain. Desert Springs. Pawn, October 9th. Pearl earrings, drop style. Scottsdale Gold Exchange, October 12th. Diamond tennis bracelet. Mesa Valley Pawn, October 15th. The fraud triggers were activating. One by one, the clause I'd written on page 16 was doing its work. Each transaction generated a database hit. Each hit accumulated in Southwestern Life's system, building a picture that would eventually require investigation. I wasn't part of that system anymore. Retirement had removed my access, my alerts, my direct line to the investigators who'd once worked under my supervision. But I knew my former colleagues. I knew how they worked. And I knew that when someone finally reviewed the accumulated flags on Diane's policy, they'd find everything waiting for them. Every theft documented, every transaction time-stamped, every piece of evidence organized with the precision of someone who'd spent 26 years preparing exactly this kind of case. I closed my notebook and locked it in the safe. The jewelry box was growing emptier, but the file was growing thicker. And somewhere in Southwestern Life's database, the trap I'd built 3 years ago was slowly closing. Marcus slid the ring off Diane's finger while she slept. Pocketed it. He laughed. She won't need it. I sat 3 feet away, holding her other hand. Said nothing. My grip tightened on her frail fingers. He didn't notice. He never noticed anything that mattered. He didn't know about the clause. 6 days before Diane died, I sat in my office watching the barometric pressure drop. The Davis Vantage, Pro 2 on the roof, showed a cold front pushing in from the California coast. Pressure falling. 30.1, 30.08, 30.04. The numbers dropped like a countdown. The kind of system that makes old injuries ache. Diane's hip had been bothering her all week. The one she'd fractured in 1998 falling off a library step stool. The morphine masked most of her pain now, but I'd noticed her rubbing the joint in her sleep, her body remembering what her conscious mind no longer tracked. I adjusted the humidity reading on the ambient station in the backyard. 32% and dropping. Rain by Thursday. Maybe earlier if the front accelerated. The front door opened. I checked the clock. 2:41 p.m. Maria was on break. Marcus knew the schedule. I switched to the driveway camera. Marcus's silver BMW sat in the usual spot. But only Marcus was climbing the porch steps. He was alone. In 4 months of documented visits, Tanya had accompanied him every single time. She was his cataloger, his lookout, his partner in whatever scheme they'd convinced themselves was justified. But today, no Tanya. No highlighted hair checking its reflection in the car window. Just Marcus, alone, moving with the particular purpose of a man who doesn't want witnesses. I switched cameras and watched him enter through the front door without knocking. The hospice room feed showed him pause in the doorway. He looked at his mother sleeping in the hospital bed, the afternoon light falling across her face, the oxygen concentrator humming its steady rhythm. He didn't speak to her. Didn't check if she was comfortable. Didn't touch her shoulder or smooth her blanket. He looked at her hands. Both rested on top of the white coverlet. Her left hand, where the wedding ring sat on her thin finger, faced toward the window. The 2-carat princess cut diamond caught the light, throwing a small rainbow onto the ceiling. I'd chosen that ring 4 years ago. A platinum Art Deco setting from a vintage jewelry dealer in Scottsdale. The design reminded me of Diane's collection of 1930s mystery novels, the ones she'd been reading to me in the evenings before she got too tired to hold a book. When I'd placed it on her finger at the courthouse ceremony, she'd laughed and said it was the most beautiful thing she'd ever owned. On the monitor, Marcus stepped closer to the bed. I didn't move, didn't reach for my phone, didn't make a sound. I sat in my office chair and watched the security feed with the same clinical focus I'd brought to 200 fraud investigations. I watched his hands the way I'd watched 1,000 suspects. The hesitation that wasn't there. The practiced motion that was. He reached for her left hand. His fingers found the ring and tested it. A small tug. The band was loose now. Diane had lost weight in the past months, her fingers thinning along with the rest of her. He slid it off, gentle, almost delicate. The motion of someone who'd done this before, who understood that sleeping patients could be disturbed by sudden movements. He held the ring up to the light, turning it, watching the diamond flash. Then he weighed it in his palm. Not a gesture of admiration, but calculation. The same motion I'd seen pawnshop owners make 1,000 times when assessing merchandise. He slipped the ring into his jacket pocket. And then Marcus laughed. Not nervous. Not guilty. The sound was genuine amusement, the kind of laugh that escapes when something strikes you as funny. He stood over his dying mother, her empty ring finger visible on the white coverlet, and found something in the moment that entertained him. She won't need it. The words came clear through the camera's microphone. Speaking to no one. Speaking to himself. Speaking maybe to Diane, who slept through the theft of her marriage, whose shallow breathing continued unchanged. I checked the timestamp. 2:47 p.m. I noted the camera angles recording the moment. The clock radio. The smoke detector. The picture frame. 3 independent feeds, all capturing his face, his hands, the ring, the laugh. My coffee went cold in my hands. I didn't move to warm it. Something shifted in me then. Not anger. I'd been angry for months. The way scattered clouds organize into a system. The way you can finally see what's coming. The scattered pressure readings and wind patterns snap into focus. And you know, this is what's coming. And this is when it arrives. Outside, the pressure was still dropping. Inside, something was finally rising. I opened my leather notebook. Found the next blank line. 2:47 p.m. Item. Wedding ring. Princess cut diamond. Platinum Art Deco setting. $28,000 insured value. Status. Stolen from patient's finger while sleeping. On the monitor, Marcus checked his phone. Scrolled through something. Glanced once more at his mother. Then he walked out of the room. Total time in the house. 12 minutes. 11 spent positioning and stealing. 1 minute standing over the woman who'd raised him, looking at what else he could take. I heard the front door close. His car started. The silver BMW backed out of the driveway and disappeared down the street. I saved the security footage to the cloud server. Backed it up to the USB drive in my desk drawer. Updated my notebook with additional details. Marcus wore the same gray jacket he'd worn last Tuesday. Navy polo visible beneath it. No visible accomplice. No hesitation in his movements. Then I locked the notebook in the safe and walked to the hospice room. Diane slept. Her breathing was steady, the oxygen cannula in place, the morphine drip doing its work. Her left hand rested on the coverlet, the ring finger bare, a faint pale band where the platinum had blocked the sun for 8 years. I sat in the chair beside her bed. I took her right hand, the one Marcus hadn't touched. Her fingers felt fragile, small bones beneath paper-thin skin. I sat with her through the afternoon, through the evening nurse's check-in, through the sunset that painted the Superstition Mountains, the same colors as her wedding bouquet, through the cold front that arrived ahead of schedule, dropping the temperature 15 degrees in 2 hours. I said nothing about what her son had done. I would never tell her. Diane drifted. Morphine kept her comfortable, but removed her from the world in increments. 18 hours of sleep, then 20. When she woke, her eyes would find me, and something would relax in her face before she slipped under again. The cold front brought rain on Wednesday, then cleared. The pressure rose. I sat by her bed and described the weather patterns moving across the southwest, the way I'd done every evening for 3 years. She couldn't respond anymore, but her fingers would sometimes tighten around mine when I spoke. On Friday afternoon, she woke. Her eyes opened clear and focused, finding mine with an intensity that hadn't been there in weeks. The morphine should have kept her under. Will alone brought her back. The hospice nurse had just left. The house was quiet, except for the hum of medical equipment. Glenn. Her voice was barely a whisper. I leaned closer. Protect Kaylee. 2 words. She squeezed my hand with more strength than I would have thought remained in her. Her eyes held mine with desperate clarity, cutting through the morphine haze with sheer will. I understand. She searched my face. Whatever she found there satisfied her. Her grip relaxed, her eyes softened, but she held on to awareness for another moment, needing to know that I'd received what she was giving. I promise, I said. She nodded once, then her eyes closed and she drifted away again. I sat in the quiet room, holding her hand, understanding exactly what she'd done. Diane knew her son. She'd always known. Mothers know. She'd spent 40 years loving Marcus, despite what he was, unable to stop, unable to pretend she didn't see. But she could trust me to do what she couldn't. Protect Kaylee. Not stop Marcus. Not punish him. Protect the innocent one. The 7-year-old with her grandmother's kind eyes, caught between parents who viewed her as an accessory to their schemes. Diane had given me permission, and she'd given me purpose beyond personal justice. She died on Tuesday. The morning light fell through the blinds in pale winter stripes across her face. Her breathing had changed during the night, growing shallow, the pauses between breaths lengthening. I'd sent Maria home at midnight and sat with Diane through the dark hours, watching the rise and fall of her chest, counting the seconds between each cycle. At 7:23 a.m., the pauses stopped becoming pauses. Her chest rose once, fell, and didn't rise again. I sat with her hand in mine for a long time. The medical equipment hummed. The oxygen concentrator continued its work, pumping air into lungs that no longer needed it. Through the window, I watched the sun climb higher, the shadows shortening across the desert landscape Diane had loved. I didn't cry. I'd cried months ago, when the diagnosis came, when I understood what was ending. When I'd sat in the same chair night after night, reading to her from her favorite mysteries, knowing each page might be the last one I shared with her. Now there was only clarity, cold purpose organizing, like a weather system, all the scattered elements snapping into formation. I called Marcus at 7:41 a.m. No answer. I called Tanya. No answer. I sent the same text to both. Diane passed this morning. Please come. I turned off the oxygen concentrator, straightened her blanket, brushed a strand of gray hair from her forehead. Tanya texted back 40 minutes later. On our way. They arrived at 9:52 a.m., 2 hours after I'd informed them that Diane was dead. 2 hours of whatever they deemed more important than being present. Marcus came through the door first. He wore a suit, as if he'd dressed for a meeting. His face arranged itself into appropriate solemnity, but his eyes scanned the room with the same assessing quality I'd watched on security footage for 4 months. "Where is she?" he asked. "In the bedroom." He walked down the hall. Tanya followed, her heels clicking on the hardwood floors, her gaze catching on the china cabinet as she passed. I watched her note the contents through the glass doors, calculating. In the hospice room, Marcus stood at the foot of his mother's bed. He looked at her face for perhaps 30 seconds. Then his attention shifted to the dresser. "To the jewelry box? Have you called the funeral home?" he asked. "Not yet. We should do that. And we need to talk about the estate, the will, the property. Get things sorted out while we're all here." Diane had been dead less than 3 hours. Tanya had drifted to the dresser. Her hand rested on the jewelry box lid, fingers drumming against the wood. "Did she say anything?" Tanya asked. "At the end?" She was peaceful. "But did she mention anything specific? About her wishes?" I looked at Tanya's hand on the jewelry box, at Marcus pretending to grieve while checking his phone, at everything they'd become while I watched from the shadows. She asked me to take care of things. Marcus nodded, distracted. "Good. That's good. We can start going through her belongings this week. No sense waiting." I observed them both with the clarity that had settled over me in the days since the ring theft. These weren't my family. They'd never been my family. They were subjects of an investigation, targets in a case I'd been building for 4 months, the final fraud investigation of my career. That afternoon, while Marcus and Tanya were still discussing funeral arrangements and inheritance timelines in my living room, I slipped into my office and checked the pawn shop databases. The wedding ring had been pawned the same day Marcus stole it. Desert Springs, pawn and gold. Transaction completed at 4:23 p.m. on November 14th, the day of the theft, less than 2 hours after he'd slid it from Diane's sleeping finger. He'd driven straight from my house to the shop on the east side, walked in with a $28,000 ring, and walked out with $4,200 in cash, less than 15% of its value. The transaction record showed his face on the security camera, his driver's license scanned into the system, his signature on the receipt. He'd used his real name, his real address, his real identification, the same procedures I'd helped establish decades ago, the ones that created paper trails for exactly this purpose. He'd smiled for the camera, confident, amused, certain that no one was watching. The transaction had triggered the first fraud alert in Southwestern Life's system. Clause 6C CII, page 16 of the insurance policy I'd designed 3 years ago. Suspicious activity provision activated. Investigation flag raised. My former colleagues would see it eventually. The case would land on someone's desk, and they would start pulling threads, and everything I'd documented would be waiting for them. But I wasn't going to wait for eventually. That evening, after Marcus and Tanya left with promises to return for funeral planning, I sat alone with Diane's body. The funeral home would come in the morning. Professionals who would take her away, prepare her, transform her into something suitable for viewing. But tonight, she was still here. Still in the bed where she'd slept beside me for years before the cancer. In the room we'd shared until medical necessity separated us. I held her cold hand. The left one, the one Marcus had reached for. The ring finger pale and bare. I wrote that clause in 2019. The words came quiet in the empty room. "You thought I was being paranoid." I remembered her laughter when I'd explained the fraud triggers. All those provisions about pawnshops and suspicious transactions. She'd called me her professional worrier. Said I saw schemes everywhere. Hope for the best, I'd told her. Insure for the worst. She'd signed the papers without reading page 16. Trusted me to handle the details. Trusted me to protect what mattered. I kissed her forehead. The skin was cool, waxy, already beginning to feel unlike her. But I could still smell her lavender lotion beneath the antiseptic, still see the woman who'd passed me a tissue box in a grief counseling group 8 years ago. "Thank you," I told her, "for everything." Then I stood, straightened my shirt, walked to my office. I pulled out my phone. Charlie Westbrook's number was still in my contacts. Hadn't called him in 3 years. My thumb found the dial button. Charlie Westbrook answered on the second ring. "Glenn." Her voice carried the weight of someone who'd been waiting. "I wondered when you'd call. You saw the alerts. The fraud triggers have been lighting up for 2 months. I was hoping it wasn't what I thought it was." She paused. "Diane's policy. Your policy. It's exactly what you thought." Silence on the line. Then, where do you want to meet? Not the office. Too many ears, too many questions about why a retired investigator was bringing a case against his own stepson. I suggested a coffee shop on Central Avenue, the kind of place with worn booths and bad lighting and enough background noise that documents could be spread without attracting attention. The smell of old coffee and cracked vinyl seats. The kind of place where nobody looked twice at paperwork. Tomorrow, Charlie said, 10 o'clock. Bring everything. I brought everything. The manila folder weighed 4 pounds. I'd measured it that morning while the coffee brewed, curious about the physical mass of 4 months of documentation. My leather notebook. 3 USB drives containing security footage, each labeled with dates and camera positions. Monthly photographs of the jewelry box contents, printed in color, chronologically organized. Insurance documents with highlighted clauses, a complete timeline, cross-referencing visits, thefts, and pawn shop transactions. Charlie was already seated when I arrived, her reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, the way they'd always been during case reviews. At 58, she'd grown into her authority. Sharp features, close-cropped gray hair. The patient expression of someone who'd spent 30 years separating truth from fiction. I'd helped her get this job 15 years ago, after she'd filed a wrongful termination lawsuit against the department for discrimination. Everyone told her to drop it. I testified on her behalf. The settlement paid her mortgage. The reinstatement made her career. Glenn. She stood, extended her hand. Professional. We'd never been friends exactly, but something stronger than colleagues. The kind of bond that forms when you go to bat for someone and they remember. I set the folder on the table between us. Charlie pulled it toward her and lifted the cover. The first page was my index. 32 categories of evidence, cross-referenced by date and item. She turned to the notebook entries. Read the first 3 pages in silence. October 8th, 2:47 p.m. Pearl earrings, drop style, $1,800 value. Marcus arrived alone. Tanya photographed contents of hall closet. She looked up. You documented the photography? Security footage. Timestamp matched. She turned to the next section. Photographs. The jewelry box, October 1st, contents intact. October 8th, 1 compartment empty. October 15th, another gap in the velvet. The progression continued week by week, a visual timeline of systematic theft. Jesus, Glenn. She kept reading. The pawn shop transaction records I'd pulled from industry databases. Marcus's financial records. The brokerage statements showing $247,000 in trading losses. The debt structure that explained everything. 20 minutes passed. She finished the last page and closed the folder. Glenn, this is... She shook her head. This is the most documented theft I've ever seen. You could teach a masterclass in building a case. I didn't smile. My throat tightened around the words. I had 4 months to watch my wife's son steal her legacy while she died. I had nothing but time. Charlie's expression shifted. The professional assessment gave way to something else entirely. I'm sorry about Diane. Thank you. She pulled out her own folder from the bag at her feet. Thinner than mine, but official. The Southwestern Life logo on the cover. Here's what my team found. The fraud triggers you designed started firing in October. The system flagged 12 pawnshop transactions across the Phoenix metro area. She spread printouts across the table. All matching items from Diane's insured collection. I studied the documents. Desert Springs Pawn. Scottsdale Gold Exchange. Mesa Valley Pawn. 3 locations I'd identified. 9 more I hadn't. Total insurance value on the items stolen and pawned, $127,000. Charlie tapped the summary sheet. That's what we can verify through transactions. Total pawn receipts, $23,000. Less than 20% recovery across the board. But drowning man doesn't negotiate the price of rope. Every transaction includes Marcus's photo ID, Charlie continued. His signature. Security camera footage of his face walking in and out. No attempt at concealment. No fake names. No intermediaries. He thought no one was watching. He was wrong. Charlie pulled out another sheet. Sal Gutierrez at Desert Springs Pawn confirmed Marcus visited 7 times in 4 months. Always nervous. Always accepted whatever was offered. Sal said he felt bad for the guy until we showed him the insurance valuations. I looked at the transaction dates. Each one fell within 48 hours of a documented theft from my notebook. The correlation was exact. "Show me the clause," Charlie said. I turned to page 16 of the insurance policy. Clause 6 CIII, highlighted in yellow. "Suspicious activity provision," I said. "When insured items appear at pawn shops, estate sales, or auction houses within 2 years of the policyholder's death, automatic investigation is triggered. Database cross-reference required within 7 business days." Charlie read the language. "You wrote this?" "In 2003, updated it in 2009, when the database protocols changed. I wrote versions of this clause for a dozen different policies over the years. Because you'd seen family members steal from estates. Because I spent 20 years watching grieving families get robbed by their own relatives." I paused. I never thought I'd be one of them. Charlie closed the policy document. "I've assigned my best investigators. Former FBI, both of them, plus a forensic accountant and a digital evidence specialist. We're treating this as a priority case. Professional obligation? Hardly." She met my eyes. "You helped me when no one else would. I remember who stood up for me during the lawsuit. This isn't just business." I nodded. Gratitude felt distant, separated from me by 4 months of watching and waiting. "What's next?" "I want to connect you with someone at the DA's office. Rosa Vega. She specializes in elder financial exploitation cases." The name was familiar. We worked together on the Hendricks arson case. 2008, maybe 2009, she remembers. When I called her about this case, she asked if it was your policy. Said she'd make time to meet with you personally. We scheduled lunch for the following week. Charlie gathered her documents and stood. "Glenn." She paused at the edge of the booth. "The evidence you've compiled. It's not just good, it's perfect. Every timestamp, every photograph, every correlation. 26 years of expertise applied to your own family." She shook her head. "I've never seen anything like it. I hoped I'd never need to use it." "No." She put her hand on my shoulder, brief and firm. "But you were ready. And because you were ready, he's not going to get away with it." Rosa Vega met me at a restaurant in downtown Phoenix, the kind of place with white tablecloths and attentive servers who knew when to disappear. She hadn't changed much in 15 years. Dark hair now streaked with silver, pulled back in a practical twist. The same patient demeanor that had unnerved defense attorneys across 100 trials. When she looked at a witness, she waited. Let the silence work. Most people filled it with more than they intended to say. She specialized in the cases no one else wanted. Families destroying families. Money turning blood into strangers. Glenn Mercer. She stood as I approached the table. I was sorry to hear about Diane. "Thank you." We sat. I placed my folder on the table. She brought her own notes, a legal pad covered in precise handwriting. "Charlie gave me the overview," Rosa said. "I want to hear it from you." I walked her through everything. The visits, the pattern, the jewelry box growing emptier, while Diane grew weaker. The security footage, the pawn shop transactions, the rings sliding off Diane's finger while she slept. Rosa listened without interrupting. When I finished, she opened my folder and began reviewing the documents herself. The security footage. She studied the timestamp on a screenshot, showing Marcus's hand reaching into the jewelry box. Arizona is a one-party consent state. You owned the property. These recordings are admissible. I made sure of it. The financial records. She turned to the brokerage statements. How did you obtain these? Industry contacts. Nothing that would compromise the chain of evidence for your case. She nodded, understanding what I wasn't saying. The records had come through informal channels, but they pointed toward information that could be subpoenaed through proper procedures. The debt structure is substantial, Rosa said. First mortgage, second mortgage, home equity line, credit cards. Monthly obligations, exceeding income by $4,000. The stolen jewelry barely made a dent, which establishes ongoing motive. She made a note. He wasn't stealing to solve a temporary problem. He was stealing because he couldn't stop the bleeding. She turned to the final section. The insurance audit report Charlie's team had generated. 32 pages of documented fraud. Every trigger activation. Every pawn transaction. Every recovered item with side-by-side photographs showing insured pieces next to their pawn shop listings. Page 16 was highlighted. Fraud investigation triggered. Official company stamp. Charlie's signature. Case number assigned. Rosa closed the folder. This is a Class 2 felony, she said. Theft from a vulnerable adult. Family perpetrator. Amount exceeding $25,000. Arizona Revised Statutes, 46 to 46. I know the statute. Sentencing guidelines are 4 to 10 years. She paused. With evidence this solid, with the security footage and the documentation, we could be looking at the upper range. 7 or 8 years minimum. I testified in a dozen cases like this. Then you know how rare it is to have evidence this complete. Rosa leaned forward. Glenn, I've been prosecuting elder abuse for 18 years. I've seen hundreds of cases where families steal from dying relatives. Most of them we can't prove. The victims are gone. The evidence is circumstantial. Family members lie for each other. She tapped the folder. This is different. You have video of the theft in progress. You have financial records showing motive. You have pawn shop transactions with his face on camera. You have a timeline that correlates visits with missing items. Every piece of evidence supports every other piece. I had 4 months. You had training. Rosa met my eyes. This is what 26 years of fraud investigation looks like when it's turned against family. The word hung between us. She didn't need to say devastating. The evidence said it for her. We'll need to expand the investigation. Rosa continued. Subpoena. Marcus's complete financial records. Interview the pawn shop owners as official witnesses. Coordinate with Charlie's team on the insurance fraud charges. She made another note. The criminal case will proceed in parallel with the civil recovery. Civil penalties? Arizona law allows up to 3 times the claim value, plus attorney fees and investigation costs. His $127,000 in stolen jewelry generates civil liability exceeding $400,000. Rosa shook her head. Criminal conviction. Civil judgment exceeding $400,000. Divorce attorneys, he'll have nothing left. Divorce. I hadn't thought about Tanya's next move, but Rosa was right. Once the arrest happened, Tanya would distance herself as fast as lawyers allowed. There's one more thing, Rosa said. She pulled a document from her legal pad. The memorial service. What about it? Charlie mentioned you hadn't scheduled it yet. You were waiting to see how the case developed. Rosa slid the document across the table. This is a referral to my office. Official. The case is now in the Maricopa County District Attorney's Elder Abuse Division. I looked at the document. Formal language. Case number. Rose's signature at the bottom. What happens now? We wait for the memorial service. Rose's expression remained neutral, but something flickered behind her eyes. I thought you might want to choose the venue. I understood. For the arrest. For the arrest. Rosa nodded. You've built this case, piece by piece, for 4 months. You documented every theft, every lie, every moment of betrayal. You watched your wife's son steal from her while she died, and you didn't confront him. You didn't warn him. You waited. She paused. That kind of patience deserves a reward. You get to decide where the handcuffs go on. I thought about the memorial service. 80 guests who'd known Diane. Former colleagues. Book club friends. Neighbors who'd watched our gentle late-life marriage unfold. They would gather to remember her kindness, her dedication, her love of reading and desert wildflowers. And Marcus would stand among them, playing the grieving son, not knowing that his performance had been documented from the first visit. Not knowing that every piece of jewelry he'd pawned had triggered an alert. Not knowing that the old man with the weather stations had been building a case file that would send him to prison. The Desert Botanical Garden Memorial Pavilion. Open air. Saguaro cacti. Spring wildflowers beginning to bloom. I know the venue, I said. Rosa nodded and wrote something on her legal pad. I looked at the folder on the table. 4 pounds of documentation, 26 years of expertise, 4 months of watching. Everything. Organized, time-stamped, cross-referenced, waiting. Diane had asked me to protect Kaylee. I'd promised. The memorial service was in 6 weeks. Time enough for Rosa's team to finalize the charges. Time enough for the forensic accountants to complete their analysis. Time enough to recover whatever items hadn't been sold yet. Time enough for Marcus to believe he'd gotten away with it. I gathered my documents and stood. Thank you, Rosa. She stood as well. Glenn, what you've built here. It's remarkable. It's also terrible. She paused. I'm sorry it was necessary. So am I. I walked out into the Phoenix afternoon. The sun hung white and hot in a cloudless sky. My weather app showed high pressure settling over the region. Clear skies for the next week. I drove home and sat in my office, surrounded by filing cabinets and monitors and the tools of a lifetime spent catching liars. The jewelry box sat on Diane's dresser, mostly empty now. The velvet compartments held impressions of what had been taken. 6 weeks until the memorial. 6 weeks of Marcus believing his careful theft had gone unnoticed. 6 weeks of him checking pawn prices and planning his next move, not knowing that every move had already been documented. I pulled out the audit report and read page 16 one more time. Fraud investigation triggered. Charlie's signature. Case number assigned. Official stamp. Hope for the best, I'd told Diane. Insure for the worst. 6 weeks after Diane died, I stood at the edge of the Desert Botanical Garden Memorial Pavilion and watched her son arrive late to her memorial service. Mexican gold poppies, purple owl clover, brittlebush painting the hillsides yellow. She used to bring her elementary school classes here every April, teaching children the names of desert plants while they complained about the heat and secretly loved every minute of it. I checked the parking lot. 1 road in, 1 road out. Rosa's sedan waited near the exit, positioned exactly where we'd planned. The pavilion's rustic wooden beams cast striped shadows across the assembled guests. 80 people filled the stone benches. Former teaching colleagues from Diane's 30 years at the elementary school library. Book club friends who'd shared wine and mysteries on our back patio. Neighbors who'd watched our gentle late-life marriage unfold over 8 years. Maria Santos, the hospice nurse. They sat in the late morning sun, tissues in hand, waiting to remember a woman who had spent her life teaching children to love reading. Marcus and Tanya arrived 15 minutes after the scheduled start time. I watched them walk up the gravel path. Marcus wore a suit, the same one he'd worn to the funeral home meeting. His gym-sculpted arms strained against the fabric. Wrong suit for a funeral. Tanya walked beside him in a somber black dress, her highlighted hair pulled back, her expression arranged into appropriate solemnity. Between them walked Kaylee, 7 years old, in a dark dress that was slightly too big, her eyes following a hummingbird instead of the casket display. They took seats in the front row. Marcus nodded to me with practiced concern. Tanya avoided my eyes. I checked the parking lot again. Deputy E.R. Rosa Vega stood near her sedan, badge visible on her belt, a plainclothes investigator beside her. They were positioned close enough to reach the pavilion in 30 seconds, far enough to remain unnoticed by someone focused on performing grief. The leather folder sat on my lap. 4 pounds of documentation, 26 years of expertise, 4 months of watching. I rose to deliver the first eulogy. The stone benches fell silent as I walked to the simple wooden podium set beneath the pavilion's central beam. I placed my prepared notes on the surface and looked out at the faces of people who had loved Diane. Diane believed that every child could learn to love reading. I spoke about her patience, her kindness, the way she'd reorganize entire library sections to make sure a struggling reader could find books at exactly the right level without feeling embarrassed. I spoke about her dedication to teaching, her love of mystery novels, her habit of reading aloud in the evenings while I tracked weather patterns on my monitoring stations. I didn't mention Marcus. The guests, who knew Diane, exchanged glances as I spoke. Whispers had circulated through the community in the weeks since her death. The son who never visited during her illness. The son who only appeared when she was dying. The son who'd asked about the will before asking about her comfort. From the corner of my eye, I watched Marcus shift on the stone bench. His phone was in his hand. He was checking something on the screen, not listening to the words being spoken about his mother. I finished my eulogy and returned to my seat. Marcus rose immediately, eager for his turn. He walked to the podium with the confident stride of a man who believed he was about to control the narrative. He straightened his jacket, adjusted the microphone, looked out at the assembled mourners with an expression of practiced sorrow. Mom would have loved this. He gestured at the wildflowers. She always said the desert was more beautiful than people gave it credit for. He paused, letting the words settle. His voice cracked slightly on the next sentence. I've been thinking a lot about legacy, about what Mom would have wanted us to remember. Same crack he'd used at his father's funeral, at his grandmother's, always at the right moment. Mom loved her family more than anything. He continued. She taught me that family is what matters most, that we take care of each other no matter what. Tanya nodded from her seat, supportive and appropriately tearful. Kaylee kicked her feet against the stone bench, bored. I know she's watching over us right now. And I know she'd want us to remember the good times, the birthday parties, the holidays, the moments that made us family. He was building to his conclusion. His voice grew stronger, more assured. The grieving son, honoring his mother's memory. Mom would have wanted us to stay together, to support each other, to keep her memory alive through the love she showed all of us. Applause began as Marcus stepped back from the podium. I stood. The applause died uncertainly as I walked toward the front. This wasn't planned. The program had only listed 2 speakers. But I was the widower, and no one would stop me from saying a few more words about my wife. I have one more thing to share. My voice carried across the pavilion, without amplification. Calm, measured. The same voice I'd used in 200 fraud depositions over 26 years. Marcus remained standing near the podium, uncertain whether to return to his seat. His expression flickered between confusion and irritation. Diane asked me to protect what she loved, her heirlooms, her family, and her granddaughter. I produced the leather folder from beneath my jacket. Marcus, I have some documents I think you should see. For a moment, nothing changed. Marcus stared at the folder in my hands, with the blank incomprehension of a man who has never imagined being caught. Then, something shifted behind his eyes. A flicker of recognition, of fear. I opened the folder and removed the first photograph. This is security footage from November 14th. I held up the image so the assembled guests could see. Timestamp 2:47 p.m. The image shows you sliding your mother's wedding ring off her finger while she slept. The photograph was high resolution, clear enough to show Marcus's face, his hand on Diane's finger, the ring halfway removed. You laughed afterward. You said, "She won't need it." Marcus's face went pale. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. This is the pawn shop receipt from later that same day. I held up the next document. Desert Springs, pawn and gold. You sold the ring for $4,200, less than 15% of its insured value. I turned the page to show his photograph from the pawn shop security camera. His face, his smile, his driver's license scanned into the system. There are 12 transactions in total. I removed the stack of receipts. 12 visits to pawn shops across the Phoenix metropolitan area over 4 months. Your face is on every security camera. Your signature is on every receipt. The guests had stopped breathing. 80 people sat frozen on stone benches, watching documents pass from my hands to the morning air. I produced the insurance audit report, 32 pages, officially stamped. Total documented theft, $127,000 in insured jewelry. Stolen from your dying mother while she was too weak to stop you. Marcus found his voice. You're confused, Glenn. His words came too fast, too loud. You don't know what you're talking about. You're just a confused old man who's been under too much stress. I removed the next page. His brokerage statements. $247,000 in day trading losses over 5 years. 2 mortgages on your house. Maxed credit cards. Personal loans from your wife's parents that destroyed that relationship. Those aren't mine. Marcus's voice cracked, but not with grief this time. Someone's framing me. Those documents are fabricated. I held up the pawn shop ID scans. His driver's license, his face, his signature. Every transaction includes your government-issued identification, scanned by the pawn shop operators as required by Arizona law. The same law I helped write during my 26 years as a fraud investigator. Marcus looked at the assembled guests, looked at the documents in my hands, looked at the exit path that led to the parking lot. This is a family matter. It's not appropriate for a memorial service. We should discuss this privately. Your mother's friends deserve to know who they're mourning with. Maria Santos nodded from the 3rd row. I noticed the jewelry box getting emptier. I thought I was imagining it. A woman from Diane's book club leaned forward. He asked me about the value of her antiques last year. At Christmas, while she was serving dessert. Phones appeared throughout the crowd. People recording, people texting. The story already spreading beyond the pavilion. Tanya had risen from her seat. She was edging toward the path that led to the parking lot, abandoning her husband with the survival instinct of someone who recognized a sinking ship. Mrs. Webb. She froze mid-step. The forensic accountants found your text messages, the ones where you cataloged each piece of jewelry and discussed which pawn shops were least likely to ask questions. Tanya's face drained of color. Her mouth opened, closed. Her eyes darted between Marcus and me, and the exit she could no longer reach. I didn't know. Her voice was barely a whisper. I didn't know it was illegal. He told me we were just getting appraisals. You photographed the contents of my filing cabinets. You measured the rooms in my house with your phone. You texted Marcus that the pearls alone could cover 3 months of payments. Kaylee looked between her parents with the confused expression of a child watching adults behave in ways she didn't understand. Her grandmother's kind eyes searching for an explanation no one was providing. 2 figures emerged from the parking lot. Rosa Vega walked up the gravel path with the measured pace of someone who had done this many times before. The plainclothes investigator followed 3 steps behind, his hand resting near his belt. Marcus Webb. Her voice carried across the silent pavilion. Professional, final. I have a warrant for your arrest. Marcus staggered back a step. His gem-sculpted arms hung useless at his sides. His artificially whitened teeth disappeared behind a grimace of pure fear. You're being charged with financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. Class 2 felony. Theft exceeding $25,000. You have the right to remain silent. She approached with handcuffs visible. Tanya had begun crying. Real tears now, not performed ones. I didn't know what he was doing. She said to no one in particular. I swear I didn't know. Mrs. Webb. Rosa's investigator stepped toward her. We'll need you to remain available for questioning regarding conspiracy charges. Marcus looked at me. For one moment, everything else fell away. The guests, the desert, the memorial service for the mother he'd robbed. Just the 2 of us, and the 4 months of documentation that had brought us here. How? His voice was barely a whisper. I wrote the fraud triggers in 2003, updated them in 2009. Every piece of jewelry you pawned activated an alert in my former company's database. I didn't need to catch you, Marcus. I just needed to document everything and wait. Rosa stepped forward with the handcuffs. Turn around, Mr. Webb. Hands behind your back. Marcus didn't resist. The fight left him the moment he saw his own face on those pawnshop photographs. He turned, slowly, mechanically, his eyes still locked on mine with something between hatred and bewilderment. Rosa closed the handcuffs. Kaylee had started to cry. The sound cut through the silence of the pavilion, small and frightened, the tears of a child watching her world collapse without understanding why. I walked over to her, knelt down so my eyes were level with hers. Kaylee, sweetheart. She looked at me through tear-blurred eyes. Her grandmother's eyes. The eyes Diane had passed down through a son who never deserved them, to a granddaughter who carried them without any of the cruelty. Your dad has to go talk to some people for a while. Come sit with Papa Glenn. I offered my hand. She took it immediately. Her small fingers wrapped around mine with complete trust, the same trust she'd shown me at birthday parties, and school plays, and Christmas dinners when her father couldn't be bothered to pay attention. I stood up, Kaylee's hand in mine, and turned toward the parking lot. Rosa Vega was leading Marcus down the gravel path. His gray suit was already creased, his confident posture gone, his whole body sagging between the investigator and the deputy DA. Like a man who had run out of stories to tell. The last thing Marcus Webb saw before they put him in the car was his daughter walking away with me, not looking back. I led Kaylee to a bench at the edge of the pavilion, away from the murmuring crowd, away from the chaos unfolding where Tanya was trying to explain herself to officers who weren't interested in explanations. Papa Glenn, Kaylee said quietly, is Daddy in trouble? I looked at this girl, with her grandmother's kind eyes, her gap-toothed smile hidden now behind confusion and fear. Her whole life about to change in ways she couldn't begin to understand. Yes, sweetheart, he's in trouble. Because of the pretty things? The ones that went to the special store? My chest tightened. She'd noticed. Children always notice more than adults think. Yes, because of the pretty things. Kaylee was quiet for a moment. She watched a hummingbird hover near a flowering cactus, her attention caught by the flash of color against the desert landscape. Grandma Diane told me those were for my wedding someday. The pearls with the pink color. I know. Will I still get them? I squeezed her hand. I'm going to try to get them back for you. She nodded, satisfied with this answer, and leaned against my arm the way she did when she was tired. In the parking lot, 2 police vehicles pulled away. One carried Marcus to booking. The other would take Tanya for questioning. The memorial service had ended, though not in any way the guests had expected. People were gathering their things, exchanging shocked whispers, glancing at me with expressions that mixed sympathy and something else. The look people get when they realize they've witnessed something. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt tired. 4 months of watching and waiting, and now it was over. But I also felt something else. Promise kept. Diane's last words had been, "Protect Kaylee." Her fingers had squeezed mine with more strength than should have remained in her failing body. I looked down at her granddaughter, still leaning against my arm, still trusting me completely. She was quiet for a moment, watching a lizard on a rock. Then, "Papa Glenn, can we get ice cream?" A sound escaped me, not quite a laugh. The morning had contained arrests and confessions and the destruction of her family, and she wanted ice cream. Yes. "We can get ice cream?" I led her past the wildflowers Diane had loved, past the stone benches where 80 witnesses had watched justice arrive, past the pavilion where her father had tried to eulogize the woman he'd robbed. The desert stretched around us, beautiful and indifferent, the spring blooms painting the hillsides in colors Diane would never see again. But I would see them. And I would make sure Kaylee saw them too, every year, for as long as I was able to bring her here. I had kept my promise. 4 months separated Marcus's arrest from the morning I walked into Maricopa County Superior Court for the bail hearing. I sat in the gallery, 3rd row, center aisle. The same seat I'd occupied during 200 fraud trials over 26 years, always as an expert witness, never as a victim. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The American flag hung limp beside the Arizona state seal. Wood paneling absorbed sound, gave the room that courthouse quiet that makes whispered conversations feel like confessions. Marcus shuffled in through the side door in an orange jumpsuit. The color washed out his complexion, made the dark circles under his eyes look like bruises. His gym-sculpted arms had already started to thin. County jail food and stress had begun their work. His attorney, a defense lawyer named Peterson with a red tie and the practiced confidence of a man who charged $500 an hour, stood as the bailiff positioned Marcus at the defense table. Rosa Vega sat at the prosecution table with Sarah Chen, her junior ADA, beside her. Rosa didn't look at Marcus. She arranged her papers with the methodical precision I recognized from our work together on the Hendricks case 15 years ago. When Rosa prepared, defendants lost. The judge entered. Everyone rose. The Honorable Catherine Chen took her seat and opened the file before her. The matter of bail for Marcus Webb. "Mr. Peterson, I've read your motion." Peterson cleared his throat. "Your Honor, my client has no prior criminal record. He's a lifelong Arizona resident with strong community ties. A wife? A daughter? He poses no flight risk and should be released on personal recognizance pending trial." Judge Chen looked at Rosa. "Ms. Vega?" Rosa stood, papers already open, voice steady. "Your Honor, the people oppose bail in any amount. Mr. Webb is facing Class 2 felony charges, carrying 4 to 10 years. His financial records show debts exceeding $600,000 across multiple institutions. He has no assets, no income, no resources to post meaningful bail, but he does have motive to flee." She opened a folder. "The evidence against Mr. Webb is substantial. Security footage shows him removing his dying mother's wedding ring while she slept. Pawn shop records document 12 separate transactions where he liquidated her jewelry collection. The total insurance value of stolen items exceeds $127,000. Peterson was on his feet. My client is grieving. His mother just died. The stress of her illness led to poor decisions. This is a man who needs counseling, not incarceration. Rosa didn't miss a beat. The theft began 4 months before Mrs. Mercer's death. 4 months of systematic, planned theft documented by security cameras. The defendant didn't know existed. She held up a photograph. The same screenshot I'd studied 100 times. Marcus's hand on Diane's finger, the ring halfway removed. This is not grief-driven behavior, Your Honor. This is calculation. And after each theft, Mr. Webb walked directly to pawn shops and converted stolen property to cash. Cash that went to cover margin calls on failed investments. Peterson shifted his weight, adjusted his tie. Your Honor, my client's financial troubles are precisely why he should be released. He needs to work with his attorneys, with his family, to address these issues. His wife filed for divorce 3 days after his arrest, Rosa said. His house is in foreclosure. His parents-in-law have cut all contact. The defendant has no community ties remaining. He has every incentive to disappear. Judge Chen studied the file for a long moment. I watched Marcus shift in his chair, his confidence draining with each second of silence. Bail is denied. Defendant will remain in custody pending trial. Peterson's shoulders dropped. Marcus turned to look at the gallery, scanning the faces until he found mine. Something flickered in his expression. Recognition, hatred. The bewilderment of a man who still couldn't understand how the old man with weather stations had dismantled his life. I held his gaze, said nothing. After a moment, he looked away. The trial began 4 months later in the same courtroom. 8 months total from arrest to verdict. Jury selection took 2 days. Rosa wanted people who understood financial records, who could follow a paper trail without losing patience. Peterson wanted emotional thinkers, people who might feel sorry for a son who'd made mistakes while his mother was dying. Rosa got her jury. I took the witness stand on day 2. 6 hours of testimony stretched across 2 days, broken by lunch recesses and sidebar conferences, and Peterson's increasingly desperate attempts at objection. Rosa walked me through everything. The security camera installation, the monthly photographs of the jewelry box, the notebook where I'd documented every visit, every theft, every change in Marcus's behavior over 4 months. Mr. Mercer, how did you first become aware that items were missing from your wife's jewelry collection? October 8th, 2024. I performed my monthly inventory and noticed her mother's gold bracelet was gone. The velvet showed a dust-free impression where it had been stored. What did you do? I checked my security footage. The timestamp correlated with a visit from the defendant and his wife 2 days earlier. I watched him remove the bracelet from the jewelry box at 3:28 p.m. Rosa produced the footage. The courtroom monitors displayed Marcus walking into the bedroom, opening the jewelry box, selecting the bracelet, pocketing it. The whole sequence took 40 seconds. Your Honor, the people moved to admit Exhibit 23. Objection. Peterson was on his feet. This footage was obtained without my client's knowledge or consent. Arizona is a one-party consent state, Rosa said. Mr. Mercer owned the property. The recording is admissible. Overruled. The exhibit is admitted. The footage played again for the jury. I watched their faces. One woman in the front row pressed her hand to her mouth. A man in the back shook his head slowly. Rosa walked me through each theft, each piece of jewelry, each pawn shop transaction. The documentation I'd compiled formed a timeline that left no room for reasonable doubt. Mr. Mercer, you testified earlier that you spent 26 years as a fraud investigator for Southwestern Life Insurance. In your professional opinion, what does this evidence indicate? A systematic pattern of theft from a vulnerable adult by a family member. The defendant identified items of value, waited for opportunities when his mother was incapacitated, and converted stolen property to cash through pawn shops within 48 hours of each theft. Peterson rose for cross-examination. He'd been waiting for this. Mr. Mercer, isn't it true that you resented your stepson? That you viewed him as competition for your wife's attention? No, but you installed hidden cameras in your own home. Cameras positioned to capture your stepson's movements. That's not normal behavior, is it? It's standard fraud investigation protocol when theft is suspected. You're not employed as a fraud investigator anymore, are you? I retired in 2020, so you were spying on your own family for 4 months, documenting their behavior. Isn't that obsessive, Mr. Mercer? Vindictive, even? I let the word sit for a moment. Vindictive. The accusation Peterson had been building toward since jury selection. I hoped I'd never need this evidence. Peterson paused. You hoped? I spent 4 months hoping my stepson would stop. He didn't. The answer hung in the courtroom air. Peterson tried to recover. But you didn't confront him, didn't warn him. You just watched and documented. Yes. Why? Because confronting him would have achieved nothing. He would have denied everything. Or he would have gotten more careful. Either way, the theft would have continued, and my wife would have died knowing her son was stealing from her. I looked at the jury. I protected her from that knowledge. I let her believe he was visiting because he loved her. And I documented everything so that when she was gone, justice could still be served. Peterson had nothing. He returned to the defense table. Rosa stood for redirect. Mr. Mercer, you've testified in over 200 fraud cases during your career. How does this case compare? This is the most thoroughly documented one, because I had nothing but time, and nothing to do but watch. The prosecution rested on day 3 after calling Charlie Westbrook, who presented the insurance audit, and Maria Santos, the hospice nurse, who testified about Marcus's visits. His presence seemed to agitate Mrs. Mercer, Maria said. Even when she was sedated, her vital signs would spike when he came in the room. I documented it in my care notes. Peterson declined to put Marcus on the stand. His client's recorded laughter after stealing his mother's wedding ring had played for the jury 6 times. Nothing Marcus could say would help. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. No requests for clarification. No questions about the evidence. They'd seen everything they needed. Has the jury reached a verdict? We have, Your Honor. The foreman stood. Middle-aged man, accountant's glasses, the kind of person who understood spreadsheets and paper trails. On the charge of financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, we find the defendant guilty. Marcus's head dropped. On the charge of theft in the 2nd degree, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of fraud, we find the defendant guilty. Guilty on all counts. The sentencing hearing came 2 weeks later. Rosa had prepared victim impact statements. I spoke first. I watched my wife's son steal from her for 4 months while she died. I documented every theft because it was the only way I could protect her from knowing what he was doing. She loved him. She would have forgiven him. And she would have died with that betrayal weighing on her heart. I paused. The courtroom was silent. My wife asked me to protect what she loved. Her granddaughter. Her memory. Her legacy. I did what she asked. Maria Santos testified about the care notes. The agitation spikes. The way Diane's blood pressure rose whenever Marcus entered the room. Then Rosa produced something I'd never seen. Your Honor, the people wished to present a letter written by the victim 6 months before her death. It was held by her estate attorney with instructions to open only if specific circumstances arose. My chest tightened. Diane had written a letter. Instructions to open if Marcus does what I fear. She'd known. She'd always known. Rosa handed the envelope to the judge. Judge Chen opened it, scanned the contents, then began reading aloud. I am writing this letter because I know my son. I have always known him. I hoped I was wrong. I hoped the love I gave him would be enough to make him into someone different. It wasn't. Diane's voice, reaching me from beyond death. I gripped the armrest of the gallery bench. I know what Marcus is. I've known since he was 16, and I found my mother's pearl earrings in his backpack. He told me he was getting them appraised as a surprise. I wanted to believe him. I always want to believe him. That's what mothers do. The words cut through me. 40 years of knowledge she'd never shared. If you're reading this letter, then Marcus has done what I feared. He has stolen from me while I was dying. He has stolen from Glenn, the man who cared for me when my own son couldn't be bothered to visit. And he has probably already tried to take everything he could before they stopped him. Judge Chen continued. I am asking the court to protect my granddaughter, Kaylee. She is innocent. She deserves better than the parents she was given. Glenn will protect her the way I couldn't protect Marcus from himself. The letter ended there. Diane's signature at the bottom, witnessed by her attorney. I sat in the gallery and felt tears running down my face for the first time since her diagnosis. She'd known. She'd prepared. She'd trusted me even before I'd proven I could be trusted. Judge Chen set the letter down. Mr. Webb, please stand. Marcus rose. His orange jumpsuit hung loose on his frame. 4 months of jail had stripped the gem-sculpted bulk from his arms. His artificially whitened teeth had yellowed. Your own mother knew what you were. She wrote this letter hoping she was wrong. She wasn't. The judge's voice was cold. The defendant is sentenced to 8 years in the Arizona State Prison Complex. No eligibility for parole for 4 years. Full restitution is ordered in the amount of $127,000. 8 years. Marcus swayed. His attorney grabbed his arm to steady him. The bailiff moved forward with handcuffs. I petitioned for guardianship of Kaylee the following month. Rosa entered Diane's letter as supporting evidence. Her estate attorney testified that Diane had discussed her concerns about Kaylee's future during their last meeting. Tanya didn't contest. Her misdemeanor conviction for conspiracy had ended her pharmaceutical sales career. The publicity had followed her to every job interview. She'd moved into a studio apartment in Tempe, working retail, rebuilding from nothing. Supervised visitation, twice monthly, was better than losing her daughter entirely. The court granted guardianship. I became Kaylee's legal guardian on a Thursday afternoon in Judge Martinez's chambers. Kaylee sat beside me in her school clothes, confused but calm. She'd spent the past 4 months shuttling between relatives, while the legal system processed her parents. Stability was what she needed. I could provide stability. Mr. Mercer, you're now responsible for Kaylee's care, education, and well-being until she reaches 18 or the court orders otherwise. Do you understand? Yes, Your Honor. Kaylee, do you understand that you'll be living with Papa Glenn from now on? Kaylee nodded. Her grandmother's kind eyes looked up at me. Papa Glenn makes good pancakes. The judge smiled. I'm sure he does. Marcus's sentencing hearing was the following Tuesday. I attended with Kaylee beside me, her hand in mine. She didn't fully understand what was happening. She knew her father had done something bad. She knew he was going away for a while. The details would come later, when she was old enough to process them. We sat in the gallery, 3rd row, same seats. Marcus was led in through the side door. The transformation from the confident man at Diane's memorial was complete. His arms were thin, his face was gaunt. The swagger had been replaced by a shuffle. He looked at the gallery as they positioned him at the defense table. His eyes found Kaylee first. Something flickered across his face. Regret, maybe, or just the recognition of what he'd lost. Then he looked at me. The hatred was still there. The bewilderment. The inability to understand how a man he'd dismissed as senile and confused had dismantled everything he'd schemed for. I met his eyes, held his gaze, said nothing. The bailiff stepped forward. The handcuffs clicked into place. They led Marcus toward the side door. He looked back once more. Your mother asked me to protect what she loved, I thought. I did. If my story resonates with you, tap like and comment a rating from 1 to 10. Explain your score. I read them all. 18 months after the trial ended, I sold the Phoenix house. Too many memories in that hospice room. Too many shadows in the hallways where I'd watched him steal from his dying mother. I took down the security cameras, emptied the filing cabinets into storage. The weather stations were the last things I packed. I bought a modest adobe home in Sedona. Single story, terracotta roof. Red rocks rising in every direction, like monuments to something older than human schemes. The sky here holds more stars than Phoenix ever showed me. The kind of sky that rewards careful observation. I set up my Davis Vantage Pro 2 on the flat roof the first week. The ambient station went in the backyard, positioned between a palo verde tree and a cluster of agave. The portable unit sits on my office windowsill, where I can check the readings while I work on crossword puzzles or read case studies from my old files. Old habits. They don't die. They just find new purposes. Kaylee has her own room now. She's nearly 9, and she picked the paint color herself, a soft sage green that reminded her of the desert plants outside her window. Books line the shelves I built for her. Art supplies cover the desk. Colored pencils. Watercolors. A sketch pad where she draws cloud formations and labels them with the names I've taught her. A watercolor of cumulonimbus clouds hangs on the wall above her bed, her name signed in careful purple letters at the bottom corner. She calls me Papa now. Not Papa Glenn, just Papa. The qualifier dropped somewhere around month 6. Neither of us noticed when it happened. She's in therapy twice a week, processing what her parents did, what her father became, what her mother chose. The therapist says she's resilient. I say she's her grandmother's granddaughter. On clear nights, we sit on the back porch, and I teach her to read the sky. Barometric pressure tonight is 30. And rising, I told her last Tuesday. What does that mean? She squinted at the portable monitor, her grandmother's kind eyes catching the porch light. High pressure system, she said. Clear skies tomorrow. Maybe the day after, too. Good. What else? She thought about it. The way she thinks about everything now. Careful. Measured. It means the weather is following rules. Systems that follow rules, I said. Behaviors you can predict. She was quiet for a moment. A coyote called somewhere in the darkness beyond the property line. The stars hung thick and bright, unpolluted by city glow. Some people follow rules. She thought about it. Then, you do. I watched a coyote shadow cross the yard, said nothing. Diane gave me 8 years of gentle companionship. A purpose after Carol died, and retirement left me with nothing but time. And finally, in her last weeks, she gave me Kaylee. I think about that letter sometimes. The one she'd written and sealed, instructions to open only if Marcus does what I fear. She'd known her son for 40 years. Known what he was capable of. Known that love couldn't change him. She loved him anyway, but she could trust me to do what she never could. Eleanor's pearls were recovered 3 months after the trial. A Tucson estate dealer had purchased them from a secondary buyer, not knowing their history. When Charlie's investigators explained the situation, the woman returned them without hesitation. Said she had a grandmother too. The pearls sit in a safety deposit box at First National Bank of Sedona, waiting for Kaylee's wedding day, whenever that comes. 40 years from now, maybe. The timeline doesn't matter. What matters is they'll be there. Sunday morning. The porch faces east, catches the first light as it spills over the red rocks. I sit in the wooden rocker I bought at an antique store in town and watch a high-pressure system push across the desert sky. Clear skies for a week. The weather stations all agree. Inside, through the screen door, I can hear Kaylee turning pages. She's reading one of Diane's old mysteries, the same dog-eared paperbacks Diane used to read aloud to me in the evenings, before the cancer, before the morphine, before Marcus took her wedding ring while she slept. Hope for the best. I told Diane that once. She'd laughed, called me her professional worrier. I hoped Marcus would be different. Hoped the love Diane gave him would be enough. It wasn't, so I prepared for what he actually was, documented everything, waited. Let the trap I'd built do its work. That's the job. Reading patterns, seeing what's coming, being ready. The coffee in my hands has gone cold. I drink it anyway because Diane always said I was particular about the strangest things. Kaylee's voice drifts through the screen door. Papa, can we do cloud watching later? After lunch. She goes back to her book. I go back to my sky. The clouds move east, pushed by systems I understand. Predictable. Reliable. Following rules that don't change based on greed or desperation or the kind of love that blinds mothers to their sons. I set down the empty cup and watch them go.